This is Shiting welcoming you to Backstage, the life behind the music. This is an online series of conversations with pianists, an exploration of their remarkable artistic lives as performers, teachers, and advocates for music. Through talking, I hope to shed some light on their process, to get a glimpse into some of their music making, the real work that takes place before they or their students step out onto the stage. In our last conversation, we talked in depth about your life as a teacher, as a composer, and a musician. I think today I would love to know more about your career as a performer. What are some current projects that you're working on?
I have some ongoing projects that I'm working on, and they're usually specific to composers. One is Bartok. Some years ago, I made a playable version of Bartok's Concerto for Orchestra. That's, of course, a great orchestra piece, late work of Bartok, but it was published in a version for piano based on his handwritten score by Georgi Shandor. And that was only published in 2000, 2001, something like that. And I loved the piece and I started working on it and quickly realized that it's not so playable as notated. Bartok had passages that were very minimal and then passages that had too many notes, and Shandor sort of touched it up. Well, I went through and combined some of what they did and went to the orchestra score and made a version. So I've been playing that a lot in recent years, and I'm hoping to record it sometime this year. Another project has to do with Gershwin, and this is an ongoing project at the University of Michigan. It's called the Gershwin Initiative. Gershwin's music has never had a complete edition, a scholarly edition, and it's time to do it. And the Gershwin family has chosen the University of Michigan to basically make a modern, beautiful, scholarly edition, critical edition of all of Gershwin's works, every single one. This is a project that'll go on for 20, 30 years. But they've started already with a few major pieces, and the piano music is where I've been involved with first the Concerto in F and Rhapsody in Blue. And I'll also probably be involved with I got rhythm variations and perhaps the American in Paris version for two pianos. I love Gershwin's music, first of all, but the state of the editions as they've been is not great. And it has been a fascinating process to be involved with the Gershwin Initiative because you have access to all of these resources, Gershwin's scores and recordings and piano rolls and so forth. And in doing that, working with various scholars, I realized that Gershwin didn't bother notating a lot of things. And so one of my contributions has been going through his recordings as much as possible, working with the scholars and the various sources to find variant readings of the piano music. And in the case of the Concerto in F, it's shocking to me how different it is from the published version that everybody knows. And I've been playing it quite a bit and trying out different variants based on the recordings. And passages where Gershwin says things like the piano should play here, but he doesn't say what to play. He would sketch notes and he would just fill it out. He's a great improviser. And so we've taken that and I've made versions of it for the pianist to play, or things that I think he did all the time was once he heard it, he would just change it to make it better. And the changes in his recordings, almost always, they're improvements. So we tried to notate all of that, and that'll be coming out soon. Same thing with Rhapsody in Blue. Fascinating process, which I've just been playing in the new version as it's evolving. It's still evolving a bit, but it won't be too long before those editions come out. And I'm kind of a project guy. I like working on projects and performing and learning about the piece as I perform, making improvements. I'm a fiddler. I like fiddling with things and making improvements. And that's been occupying me. Another project is an arrangement of Mozart's Baroque suite studies. I worked with a former doctoral student of mine, Hyun Jung Won. She's in Korea now, but she and I put together a version of Mozart's suite studies to perhaps publish as a single integrated suite. I also have my own version of Liszt Dante's sonata. I've played for many years the sonata in B minor. And that is a masterpiece from beginning to end, every single note. I always liked the thematic material of the Dante sonata, but I always felt that it seemed unfinished, that there was a lot of it that kind of just seemed not thematic, or just doubling, or he would repeat the same passage a number of times and say, play louder. You know, if you want me to play louder, I think you should give me some more notes to play. Or just passages where he just would tremolo and nothing was happening. And I started going through it and making things more thematic. So I have a version of that I've been playing, and I also hope to publish that before too long. So my projects are partly performing, but also partly my work as a composer comes into it, and arranger, and I get my hands on it. And I don't see a score as something behind glass, like in a museum that you're not supposed to touch. It doesn't bother me to touch the notes and get in there and look at all sources and think about what it could be. You know, and so my projects are not strictly performing, but certainly performing is a big part of it.
That's a very interesting topic. How do you see the act of performing? I mean, as a composer, you're constantly creating something new. In performing, do you also feel like you're creating something new?
The short answer is yes. The longer answer is quite a bit longer. And it's something I've thought about a lot, and I continue to think about it. What is it you're doing when you're performing? When you actually are there performing? Are you a curator of a museum piece from long ago, and you're supposed to have it behind glass and perfect for people to look at? No, I don't think that way. I do like to do all of the preparations and learn the notes and play them as to the best of my ability. And are you communicating with people? Absolutely, you are. You feel it when you perform. Are you focusing yourself on the work you're doing? Absolutely. Is it a matter of achievement? Yes, it is. You've worked very hard to get to this point. Are you ready to do it? No, you're not. That's the secret of performing. You're never ready. You work, you work, you work, you work. You do all of the physical things you need to do, the sound things. You understand the piece, memorize it, and so forth. And then the day of the performance comes, and that's it. You walk out there and do it. You're not really ready, ever. You get more ready. And I think it's worth thinking about, what is it you're trying to do? And you fall short of it. You're a human being and you fall short, but what is it you're trying to do? And I think of creating to the best of my ability, and presenting something and giving it to the audience to share with me. I like to think of performing more as sharing and giving and embodying the music. I really think all of your work, all of it, the technical side of it, the musical side of it, the imagination, creativity side of it, the oral side of it, how it sounds, everything, stylistic things, historical things, theoretical things, insights you've had, all of it. There's a process of assimilation that takes place. And if you have done your work over time, worked hard, I know a lot of people in a lot of fields, and I can say one thing: anybody who's any good at anything, really, they work hard at it. You work hard, but you're trying to assimilate the piece to the point where it's no longer a bunch of little things. It's almost like one thing from beginning to end. You start and the notes fall into place, the moves the composer makes. You live and breathe it. It's almost like a state of being you achieve. And I think of that as being an alive and unique thing that's happening right then. And it reminds me of something my old teacher, Artur Balsam, told me long ago about Murray Pariah. Murray Pariah was a sometime student of Artur Balsam. They worked together for years and became very good friends. That's the first time I met Murray Pariah, was through Balsam. But he described what it was like when Pariah was playing in the Leeds competition. And that's what started Pariah's career, really. He was playing Schumann Davidsbündler Tänze, and he was playing one of the slow movements. And the judges, Balsam was on the jury, and he said, describing it, he said, you can't imagine what that was like to hear him play that beautiful, intimate, poetic piece. He said all the judges for the whole competition were sitting there making notes and writing their comments and thoughts and keeping track of things and scoring and whatever they do. And he said it was as if Pariah was making it up on the spot, just right there, the notes just occurring to him as he's playing them. And he said, I realized I wasn't writing anymore. And I looked to my left, and next to me, a couple of seats down, was Nadia Boulanger. She was also a judge. And all the judges had done the same thing. They put down their pens and they were listening. And Nadia Boulanger's face was beatific expression and tears just pouring out of her eyes. And I think of something like that. What is that experience? It silenced the critical part of people's brains, and they entered into a world that was being created right then, right then. I wish I had been there. I wish I had heard it. Have you ever been in a performance and it's so good, and the person, you get the feeling they're not reciting memorized words. They're speaking. They're speaking the notes through their fingers. and you are connected to them, and they're connected to you, and you're connected to the composer from halfway across the world and hundreds of years, and 30 minutes goes by like that.
Yes.
You know, those are moments that you don't forget. I have had that on occasion. I'll tell you one for me. I was lucky enough to perform in Bartok's hometown. It's a town in Romania called San Nicolau Mare. It used to be in Hungary, but the border shifted. It's St. Nicholas is the name of the town, basically. And I had played a Bartok recital there, and there were a bunch of people in the audience in that hometown. It was sponsored by the Bartok Society there. And I got to the end and I started playing a Bartok piece. It's called Evening in Transylvania from 10 Easy Pieces. And it's a folk song setting. And I played it as an encore. I loved the piece. Bartok often played that piece. But on the second phrase, the older women in the audience started singing with me. And they sang that folk tune, every phrase with me. I knew that style too. I knew the rhythm and the inflection. It's very peculiar, that style. And I thought I was going to burst into flames. I thought I was going to die of being inspired. I couldn't believe I was hearing this with my own ears. And in that moment, I felt connected to those people, to Bartok, to centuries of music making, to what he had achieved. And we were one thing. And I think music is about sharing and connecting and touching people's hearts where they live. And I wasn't thinking of individual notes. I had assimilated that piece and that style, and I was speaking from my heart, you know, and they were too. And it's a beautiful memory that stays with me to this day.
Mm-hmm.
And good playing has that. It feels spontaneous. Feels spontaneous to me when it goes well.
Yeah. You mentioned your teacher Balsam, and from what I know, he was mainly a chamber musician. I'm wondering what are some of the most unforgettable things that you've learned from him over the years?
He was just a pure musician. I mean, it was remarkable to be around someone like that. He didn't talk about it as much as show. He wouldn't explain as much as, you know, wait a minute, you know, and he'd say here more and here there less and show you. And I asked him how to do this, and he said, "Oh, I'm a baby, you know, I don't know this." But he knew, he would hear it. He would hear it. You're too much there, too little there, not enough here, more there. And he would tinker away at my playing. And I got to really understand the way he heard music. Another thing, I think this came from chamber music. He wanted me to make music out of every part of the notes. And he often would pick on my bass line. He'd say, your bass line's no good. It's cello, you know, and this is violin, and this is viola. And he would often describe it in chamber music terms, but also counterpoint. He would follow lines, and to his ear, those lines had to make sense. They had to make sense and follow one another, be musical. Every part of it had to be musical. I was talking to Kevin Corson on the faculty at Michigan, a wonderful scholar, theorist. And I was talking with him about Balsam. I think I'm remembering this correctly. I may have some details wrong, but Kevin is a Schenkerian theorist. A lot of what he does is Schenkerian. At least that's part of what he does. And I was telling him I was interested in Schenker analysis, but I mentioned it to Balsam, and Balsam didn't really know anything about it. But I said to Kevin, he seemed to think like that. He seemed to experience music like that, these slow moving contrapuntal lines. Always, he would hear that and see that. And if I'm remembering this correctly, Kevin said he was Polish, wasn't he? And I said, yes, he was Polish. He said, that's very interesting, and it doesn't surprise me. Because he said, you know who Schenker's teacher was? And I said, no. He said, Karl Mikuli, who was Chopin's pupil. And he said, there are people in the Schenkerian world who feel that what Schenker did was take essentially a performance and compositional tradition and put it in graphic form. And he said Balsam probably grew up steeped in that. He just heard music like that. And I like that because it's so musical. Sometimes people pick on Schenkerian analysis because it reduces pieces to the point where almost every piece seems the same, you know. But what it essentially is doing is looking at contrapuntal lines happening all the time behind the music and how they fit together and make music at different rates of speed. It makes a contrapuntal fabric. Balsam did that. Balsam heard lines, and he also had beautiful sense of sound and taste. He was always after me about this and that, this and that, this and that, this and that. My scores are full of his, you know how in scores I put a little X to the side and make a little, that's where I got that from. He was always doing that. Just beautiful taste. And another thing about him, I remember, so moving to me. I noticed on his piano for weeks, he had all these stacks of manuscript paper. And I asked him, I said one time, Mr. Balsam, what is that? Oh, it's nothing, you know. And I said, but it looks like manuscript paper. Yes. And then, well, what is it? And he said, oh, in the old days, going from Europe to America, you had to take a boat. And it would take many days. And he said, it's so boring. And he said, to pass the time, what he would do is listen in his head to pieces that he loved and write out all the notes on manuscript paper. So all of those things were copied out by hand, great pieces of music that he was hearing in his head. What a remarkable mind that is. He said that was just so pleasurable.
Did he write down every note?
Yeah, as far as I could tell. I mean, I didn't go through the manuscript and compare it to the original, but he was hearing his way through the pieces. He said it was just a great pleasure to do that. He had an amazing musical mind, that's for sure. And I loved his playing from the first moment I heard it, you know. He also was very pure in lessons. He didn't talk much to you about other things. He'd just say, what do you have? And you'd sit right down and start working. And it was all music all the time. And I also had the feeling that he cared for me deeply and that he was trying his hardest to teach me to the best of his ability and give me something. And after the lessons, often they took place in his apartment, usually in New York City, overlooking the Hudson River. And we would listen to music, and often chamber music or opera or symphonies or something like that. And then he and his wife would have tea and little cookies and things like that. and tell stories about their life, long life in music. He was in his 80s when I was studying with him. And it was almost like his apartment was from a different era. His life was from a different era. He grew up in the same town as Rubinstein. He grew up hearing Rubinstein as a boy. You know, Rubinstein was older, but they were friends and he knew his playing. And I loved hearing him talk about Toscanini. He was pianist for the NBC Symphony Orchestra under Toscanini. He was at the premiere of Bartók's, it's the concerto version of the Sonata for Two Pianos and Percussion. He was there when Bartók premiered it, the concerto version. And it's just fascinating to hear him. And he knew so many people. I would ask him questions about all these great musicians, what they were actually like, you know, spending time with them. And it was wonderful. History came alive to me. And I learned so much music. And I think he helped me in so many ways sound better. And I adored the time I spent with him.
Thank you for talking with me again. And thank you for letting us to see a little bit into your personal world and your artistic world as a teacher, as a composer, and also as a performer.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.